Most men measure their legacy by who stays, the crowd, the name on the building, the people still quoting them years later. I've learned to measure mine by who leaves. This is the last episode of Steadyman, 50 episodes, and I wanted to spend it telling you about the man who taught me that. He's also the man who is a steady man, because he does it without ever once saying it out loud. So there's a man who shaped my life. He spent years serving in Africa. He's helped churches and people all over the country. Tens of thousands of people around the world have been impacted by his ministry. He knows how to build leaders. He knows how to keep a whole room focused on Christ when everything in that room wants to drift somewhere else. And none of that is what marked me. What marked me is this: he gets down on his knees to pray when nobody's looking. I've said it before in the series. For a man of faith, there is no truly unwatched room. This man lives like he actually believes that. And here's what I've come to understand watching him. The man you are when nobody's watching is the man who ends up living inside other people. Not your accomplishments, not your title, not the highlight reel. The unwitnessed man. That's the one that transfers. I want to tell you a story about him. He was our interim pastor. He was covering for our pastor who was dealing with illness and suddenly passed away. During that time, he lived in Florida, and he flew to Iowa every single week to preach our services. He's retired, by the way. He's supposed to be at home enjoying his family. Instead, he's on a plane every week for a church that isn't even his. So one Sunday we have this blizzard and he can't come into our city. So his flight gets diverted to Minneapolis, but his luggage stays on the plane that comes to our town. He had no coat, he had no long sleeves, no gear if the vehicle broke down. He had every reason in the world to cancel. Not only that, we're in the midst of a blizzard and our church stayed open. There wasn't going to be that many people there anyway. A diverted flight in a blizzard is the most defensible out a man will ever be handed. He rented a 4Runner, and keep in mind, he was in tropical climates for practically all his life. He did not know winter. He did not know snow. He did not know ice, and he certainly didn't know blizzards. But he came anyways. He got in the vehicle with short-sleeved shirts and drove 5 hours to be able to preach. If he went in the ditch, he was in an impossible situation, and now those roads were not good. So he drives in the middle of Iowa through blizzard conditions. He pulled in just in time to preach the evening service that barely anybody attended. Nobody was watching that highway. Nobody was grading that decision. And that's exactly the point. Legacy isn't built in the moments a man performs. It's built in the moments he had every right to cancel and didn't. But I need to back up because this story is bigger than that one drive. When I first walked into my church, the pastor was a man named Pastor John. John made it easy to walk in. He would welcome new people from the front, and then he'd say something I've never heard another pastor say. Find a church home, even if it isn't this one. He'd point out that there are church communities all over this area that worship differently, do things differently, and what matters most is that you get into a church family, even if it's not ours. Think about that, a pastor holding the door open in both directions. His eyes were on Christ for himself, for his family, for his church family, and even for the people who might never sit in his pews. A few years after I started coming, Pastor John passed away. And the man who stepped in, the interim pastor, the man on his knees, the man in the blizzard, was Pastor John's great friend and his mentor. Do you see it? The man who shaped John got on a plane every week at retirement age to tend the church his own investment had built, to finish what the man he'd poured into couldn't finish. That blizzard drive wasn't just a preaching commitment. It was a man carrying his legacy further than he ever planned to carry it. Because that's what legacy costs when you're on the giving end. Sometimes you outlive your investment and you keep driving. So here's what I've learned about legacy, standing inside this chain. First, legacy is transitive. It passes through people. His steadiness produced something in John. It produced something in me. And for 9 years now, I've been working with men, and what he planted in me has been passing into them, whether I've tracked it or not. Second, legacy is mostly invisible to the man who leaves it. You don't get to watch most of your legacy form. My mentor didn't watch me become the man sitting in this chair. He made the deposits, the challenge, the encouragement, the knees, the drive, and the return matured out of his sight. So will yours. Hear that. So will yours. And third, this is the hardest one. The men who cling to you, quote you, orbit you, that's not a legacy. That's a following. A steady man's legacy is measured in departures. I've seen it with the men I've walked with. They learned quickly that I'm doing the work in myself, so they started doing the work in themselves. They don't need me to follow the Holy Spirit. They don't need me to serve others or to face their own hardships. They took the words, faced themselves, and started living it out. And then they left, carrying it. That's not lost. That's the whole point. My mentor built lay leaders so churches wouldn't need him. Pastor John pointed visitors to churches' homes that weren't his. The open hand runs all the way up this chain. If you're building people who can't function without you, you're not building a legacy. You're building a dependency with your name on it. And I'll tell you where his fingerprint shows up in my life right now. I'm walking through a season with circumstances I would not have chosen. I'm not going into the details. They're not the point. The point is what he planted in me shows up right there, not in getting the circumstances I want, but in following Christ through the circumstances I have. Actions, not announcements. Living it instead of talking about it. That's him and me under pressure. So if this series has been doing that kind of work in you, subscribe so you don't lose the thread. And if you want the questions that started all of this from me, they're free at lifechangingquestions.com. That's it. Back to the work. Now let me tell you the part I'm not proud of. That man, the one on his knees, the one in the blizzard, the one this entire episode is about, I haven't talked to him in at least 6 months, maybe a year, and I had a good reason. Listen to how reasonable it sounds. I want to respect his time. He impacts so many people. He's supposed to be retired, enjoying his family. Who am I to interrupt that? 49 episodes ago, I might have believed myself. But this series taught me to hear that sentence for what it is. The lie always sounds reasonable. The man who rented a 4Runner in a whiteout to keep one commitment is not a man who feels burdened by a phone call from someone he spent years investing in. That call is not an interruption of his retirement. That call is part of his harvest. I built a courteous-sounding permission slip to avoid one phone call, and I even caught myself reaching for the next move, thinking maybe I should find a new mentor, somebody who isn't retired, which sounds like initiative. It's actually just a longer way to avoid the same call. So here's my commitment on camera, unresolved, because that's how this series has always worked. I'm making the call, not so I can report back that it went well. The call belongs to him and me, but the commitment belongs here in front of you, because you and I both know what happens to the things a man plans to do quietly. Deciding is the follow-through. I just decided. Paul wrote this to Timothy near the end of his own race, still mentoring, still entrusting, with the finish line in sight. You have heard me teaching things that have been confirmed by many reliable witnesses. Now teach these truths to other trustworthy people who will be able to pass them on to others. 2 Timothy 2:2. 4 generations in one verse. Paul, Timothy, trustworthy people, others. That's the chain I've been describing this whole episode. And notice, Paul's legacy was never measured by who stayed at his feet, it was measured by who he sent. So here's the work it goes two directions, and you've got 1 week. Reach up. There's a man who shaped you. Maybe you've been respecting his time right out of your life the way I have. Call him this week, not a text, a call. You don't need a reason beyond the truth. You're part of what his life built, and he deserves to hear it while he can. And open your hand. Somewhere near you is a man who needs what was planted in you. Start making deposits. Small ones count. And then release the need to watch it take root, because you don't get to see most of your legacy form. Build anyway. 50 episodes. If you've walked all of them with me, or if this is the first one you've ever seen, the assignment is the same. Get on your knees when nobody's looking. Drive the blizzard when nobody would blame you for skipping. Make the call you've been respectfully avoiding. Pour into someone who is going to leave you, and let them go. The man you are unwatched is the legacy you're already writing. One day better.